yeah, let's get moving because we have a lot to cover. It's a very complex issue we're going to talk about because the very topic of it is complexity itself. And indeed, we're going to talk about a systemic view of the Earth system. And it may sound far-fetched, or let's say far away from for some of you. Indeed, it's a very broad manner of looking at what the way, looking at the dynamics that will impose themselves upon our future in some ways. The thing is that there are going to be some big dynamics at play in the forthcoming years and decades, which will concern all of us somehow, and it will concern all our societies in ways that are completely new and unforeseen so far by at least, I mean, some people foresee those dynamics, but the decision makers don't. They haven't yet understood, and that's probably the main one of the main messages I would like to convey today is that we are not in a situation in which we know we understand the problems. We know there's a problem with the climate. We know there's a problem with energy. We know there's a problem maybe with water. There's a problem with some materials, some ores, and there's pollution problems, and then this and that. But we have solutions. So solutions exist, and it's just a matter of political will. And some, maybe the market will do its job and provide somehow. Maybe, I don't know. It will work. They will find. But we know the problem. No, it's not true. We don't know the problem. We haven't yet understood the very nature and the urgency and the scope of the problem we're dealing with, and the implications of the crisis is beyond the understanding of most people, including decision makers. I'm not saying that decision makers are all good guys and they're doing their best. No, most of them some lie and manipulate. So I'm not trying to get them off the hook. But even if they were completely honest and doing their best all the time, well, it wouldn't be enough because they still haven't understood the very nature of the problem. So let's talk about it. There's going to be two parts in my intervention today. The first part is about understanding. The second part is about reacting to that understanding. The first part, let me tell you, is a really, really unpleasant moment. It's not going to be nice. It's going to be difficult for many of you, I'm sure. And then in the second part of my talk, my lecture, we're going to see what we can do about it, what we can still do about it. And we'll see as well that some of the solutions that are presented to us from time to time, very often, the ways in which we try to cope with what's looming ahead is not relevant so far. It hasn't been. It doesn't mean everything is not useful, but most of the things that we think are solutions are not. There are ways to I don't know, to mitigate a little bit the problem, but I won't go as far as solving anything. So I'll try to convey that idea and then move on to so what's left? What options are left for us? So please stay until the end, because if you leave after the first part, it's going to be very hard for you psychologically. So please remain until the end. What I would like to say before I get started also is that in the first part of my presentation, I present to you a systemic analysis of our plight, of our predicament, and I will not give you my personal opinion. I'll use my personal method, but I won't give you my personal opinion because it's about knowing and not having an opinion. So I'm just going to propose to you a synthesis of what experts say in different fields, and I'm not an expert in any of these fields, so I don't have my say on these topics. And neither do you, and neither do your friends or a family or boss, whatever, even professors. So that's something I want to say, is that intuition and opinions do not count. You just need to understand. Then I'm going to use a certain number of references, publications, and yeah, papers. And be careful also. That's a methodological, sorry, warning that I'm giving you now. Be careful, because you can use scientific background, scientific publications to back up any sort of ideology. So it's not because someone uses scientific references that what he says is scientific. So be careful with that. What I'm going to do, and you can check it out if you wish, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go over a certain number of disciplinary areas, fields, and for each one of them, I'm not going to cherry pick the publications that I like, because they go in a direction that suits me. I'm going to use very well thought of publications, papers that have that are recognized as reference papers. Okay, so let's get going. Today, I will explain things to you. I will try to give you ideas on how to understand and how to act. Maybe give you a few methodological insight. So that's, of course, one of the points of my talking to you. But also, I want to do this. I would like to do this for as many of you as possible, to wake you up, because we need to wake up. We seriously need to wake up. The challenges and the implications, if we do not meet those challenges, are huge, and they're never seen before in human history. For the first time, we have saturated the whole planet, and now we have no room for maneuver, almost no room for maneuver. And the consequences of our model of society developments, the consequences, we were able to dodge them for a while because we still had room. But now it's over. We don't have that room anymore, and the consequences are showing up in our lives, and it's going to accelerate, which I'm going to try to prove to you right now. So first, let's try to understand. Before I move on, I just want to make sure that you can see what I'm showing to you. Do you see?
Yes, it works fine.
Understand? You see it?
Okay? Yes.
All right, good. I'm happy. Well, first of all, let's say that we live on a planet which has limits, many kinds of limits. And of course, it's a small planet. I mean, it's big for us, but it's rather small. And there are physical limits to this planet, but there are actually many types of limits. And it's not me saying it, it's experts of the planet, of the Earth system, what we call the Earth system. If you're not familiar with the expression Earth system, we'll talk about it in a few minutes. So the first paper I want to talk about is this one. It's called The Planetary Boundaries, was published in 2009. It was updated a few times since then. The last update dates back to last April. And basically, those researchers asked the question, what would be the conditions to keep planet Earth habitable? So that's in itself the challenge. That's what we're talking about. There are many issues in this world, many problems, but here we're talking about, I believe, the overarching problem, the overarching the challenge to meet. Because if we do not meet this challenge, all the other challenges are become meaningless. What's at stake right now is the habitability of our planet. Is it able to sustain life, different life forms? So they figured out that there are 9 limits that should not be crossed in order to remain, to maintain the planet in an equilibrium zone, what they call a safe operating space. Now, if we move beyond that space, we enter a zone of high turbulences. We enter a domain where you have non-linear processes, which means that you have accelerations, you have positive retractions, you have exponentials, which show up here and there, and the whole system goes into chaos. And that's what we're beginning to feel right now on a planetary scale. So those 9 limits They're there. If you don't know them, I'm not going to go through all of them. Some of them are, are separated into two sub limits. But anyway, there are 9 main limits. The first one is climate change, and there's a climate issue right now, and we are out of the safe operating zone. But there are other issues which are, from a Earth system point of view, even worse. The degradation is even worse than when it comes to climate change. You have biodiversity, biosphere integrity, that's biodiversity loss. You have land system change, which is the way we use land and soil. You have novel entities. What they call novel entities is what we put into the environment which should not be there. Basically, it's waste and pollutions. You have geochemical flows. Namely, they have focused on the flow of phosphorus and nitrogen. And there's another sub boundary that's been crossed. It's about water. We are very close to the limit when it comes to ocean acidification as well. So, and also there's the atmospheric aerosol loading, which we do not know if that boundary has been crossed or not, because the quantification of it hasn't been officially validated. So today, what we can say, according to this big study, is that there are 9 limits that should not be crossed if you want to keep Earth livable, and we have crossed already at least 6 of them. So that's very serious, guys. Another publication I'm going to use is this one, The Great Acceleration, published in 2015 by other scientists, which are Earth system scientists, and they've looked at human activities, and that's on the left-hand side, the part in yellowish, orange, and red, and they've figured out that since 1950 and in the following decades, there's been a tremendous acceleration in many of the human activities and flows that come, energy and material flows that that come with it. So you have, for example, urban population, which goes up, primary energy use, which goes up, fertilizer consumption, water production, paper production, water use, or other things. And then on the right-hand side, you have the effects, the implications on the natural systems. For example, you have the concentrations of greenhouse gases, which go up, and you have ocean acidification, surface temperature, coastal nitrogen, the accumulation of nitrogen in coastal areas, and tropical forestry loss, etc. So there are limits, and we are crossing those limits because the human activities are exploding, are booming, with booming consequences upon the natural systems. Now, there's also a third publication I want to talk about. This one is very old, and it's really relevant. It was published more than 50 years ago. It's called, some of you have probably heard of it. It's called The Limit to Growth. And then there was an update in the 90s, and another update 30 years after the first publication, which is shown on the right here. And if you haven't read it, really, I would recommend you to read that book. It's a bit technical, but if you don't read it, you don't understand how clever it is. You don't understand how elegant it is as well. It's a really good study. What they tried to do back then, 50 years ago, is that they tried to model, to come up with a model for the Earth system. And obviously, it's too big to model. It's impossible. So they've just chosen a few parameters. This is how it looked like in their book. It may look complicated to some of you, but to model the Earth is obviously very, very simplistic. But the good thing about this publication is how clever the parameterization of all the different variables and their interconnection, how clever that was. And the thing is, 50 years later, this publication is still relevant. The model still represents the real world. They have put together this model, then they have come up with scenarios. Overall, they tested 13 scenarios, and today we are very close to one of them, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. What we can see in this publication is curves pretty much like this. and these curves are not really cheering, because some of the curves go up, others go down. And as you can see, there's a population curve which goes down pretty much from the at the middle of this in the middle of this century. So this is not a prediction, okay? It's a model, a model which pretty much works like this. What happens if we change such and such parameter, this and in the input? What happens to the output? How does the system react? That's what it works for. That's a system like this is not, once again, a provision or a prediction. It just says if we, for example, if we decide that we double the quantity of energy or raw materials, what happens? If we double population, what happens? If we divide population by 2, what happens? If we make this or that societal choices, what happens? How does it translate into the system's dynamics? That's exactly what it's worth for. So even if it's not a prediction, it's still interesting to know which variables we can act upon and what consequences this might have on the whole system, planetary system. So there's a 2020, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was in 2020, publication by an American woman called Gaia Harrington, which is really good. If you're interested in these things, take a look at it. It's an update to limits to growth with 50 years of data, and basically she reached the following conclusion, that the scenario we're closest to is the one on the top right corner, called BAU2, which means business as usual 2. On the top left, you have business as usual. Business as usual is we don't change anything. We keep doing the way we've already done. We've always done, and that's one of the main scenarios in the original publication, Limits to Growth. As you could see, the BAU scenario translates into a population curve which starts decreasing around 2030. Now, with the BAU2 scenario, we have exactly the same initial conditions, but we have doubled the amount of resources available. See, from the difference at the beginning of the 20th century. Sorry about that. I should have been cleared. To be clear, so from the 1900, we have exactly the same initial point, but the resources are doubled. So what does it change if we have double the amount of resources? But what you can see is that not much. The population curve still goes down slightly later, not 2030, maybe 2040. The rest of the world keeps, let's say, collapsing after that point. And the only curve that goes up is pollution. The difference between BAU and BAU2 is that pollution, instead of going back down before 2050, keeps going up, and the planet becomes unlivable. It becomes toxic. Toxic because we have used all the resources we could. And this is very close to what we're doing. We are exploring and exploiting and extracting everything we can, and faster, and we are today still very close to the BAU2 scenario. We'll see what happens. One of the main conclusions, lessons I would say, which are to be learned from Limits to Growth, it's a conclusion that's been reached and proven by many different studies in many different fields. It's how does a system reacts if it has limits, and if you apply to the system a growing constraint over time, what happens? Well, there are 4 ways a dynamic system can react. The first way on the top left is called continuous growth. It's if the limits can grow forever, then the pressure you apply to this system can grow forever too. If it stays under the limit, well, why not? After all, I mean, you destroy many things, but the system can regenerate even faster than you destroy it. So it can be sustainable. But that is pure math. It doesn't work in reality. In reality, you can move up move further away the limit, but to some extent, there's a limit to how far you can get the limit. So um, the first graph, continuous growth, doesn't apply to our actual real physical system. What are we talking about, by the way? We're talking about the Earth system once again, and I'm going to talk about it even more in the forthcoming slides. But we're talking about the Earth system, and it has a limit. Limit here is the dotted line. It's the biocapacity, and the pressure we apply to it is the other curve, which is the ecological footprint. So basically, to be very simplistic here, but we could say that the ecological footprint is the pressure we exert, we apply to the system, and the biocapacity is the capacity of the system to sustain this pressure, to endure it. Basically, it's close to the notion of carrying capacity. So in the real world, we can put we can um, we can increase the biocapacity to some extent. So let's go to the top right figure. You not figure graphic. You can make it bigger, but to some extent. If you remain under it, if the pressure you apply remains under is it okay? Because I can hear people speak. Is it okay?
No, it's fine. There's some noise from the street. It's fine.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm not used to doing this in English, so my English sometimes is a bit it's a bit blurred. I'm trying to find the right words, and they don't come easily always. So anyway, I'm doing my best. So you can postpone. It's not the right word, but you can put forward the limit to some extent. And if you remain under, if the pressure remains under it, the system can remain stable. Now, the real question is, what happens if the black line crosses the dotted line and it goes over it? So let's go to the bottom left graphic. What happens then? Well, what you can see is that in this case, the biocapacity starts decreasing just after the two curves cross. Why is that? Basically, when the dark line crosses the dotted line, it means that the pressure you exert is bigger than what the system can endure. And there are three different dimensions to that. The first dimension is the resources we extract upstream, and means we extract resources faster than their capacity to renew, to renew, for those who are renewable, of course. And then the second part of this is that we downstream, we generate waste and pollution faster than the system can absorb those waste and pollution. For the waste and pollution that can be absorbed, because everything cannot. And in the middle, between upstream and downstream, there's we use the resources, we transform them using energy into goods and services, for example. And doing that, we change nature and we destroy some ecosystems. And it turns out that we change nature faster than it can adapt, and we destroy it faster than it can regenerate. So that's what it means when the ecological footprint curve goes over the biocapacity curve. And so if you do that, the biocapacity curve declines. If you put too much, for example, pollution into an ecosystem that it can absorb it, progressively the ecosystem's capacity to deal with more pollution decreases. But the real question now is, if your ecological footprint goes higher than your biocapacity, what happens? Well, what will happen is that the curves will cross again. The ecological footprint cannot remain above biocapacity for a long time. You can't take resources from the environment faster than it can renew those resources forever. You can do it for a while, and then it goes back down. Your black line goes, whatever happens below the dotted line at some point. And that is whatever we do. It doesn't matter really what choice we make as societies. The thing is, the crosses will the lines will cross again, whatever we do, whatever happens. There are two options though. First option, so bottom left, first option is that the biocapacity, the ecological footprint goes back down quickly and goes back underneath the biocapacity within a reasonable time frame. And if we, before the biocapacity has dropped too much, and in this case, we have what they call overshoot and oscillation. The whole system can remain sustainable and oscillate around an equilibrium state. But if we don't do that, if we keep growing, the ecological footprint, and the biocapacity starts falling, well, that's a whole different scenario. Then, as I said, the ecological footprint will anyway go back down below the biocapacity, but it will go back down a curve which has dropped significantly in between. And that, for our societies, means chaos. They call it overshoot and collapse. We'll see what happens, but this is pretty much what you have to keep in mind, is that whatever we do, the line we are today above biocapacity, and it's not going to last. Either we organize the descent, or the descent will organize itself against us somehow. The system will regulate itself against us. This is very important. Take a look at this book and read it if you can. Now, after this introduction, it's a long introduction, but it's an introduction. It's a systemic problem, and the implications of this problem impact all dimensions of the Earth system. I've been talking about this Earth system for a while now. If you still don't know exactly what it is, let's go. Let's discover it. It has 6 dimensions, and the first dimension is lithosphere. It's the external part of the planet's crust, and we extract from it a certain number of resources that our modern societies need to work. And the first of those resources is oil. Our societies need oil to work, but they don't just need that. What they need is a constant, abundant flow of cheap oil. That's what we need. If oil is too expensive, it doesn't work, because everything has been based on the idea that there would be forever abundant, cheap oil. The way our cities are built, the way our transportation systems are conceived, are designed, the way our economy and has been thought of, has been designed, all that depends on abundant cheap oil. If it stops, then most supply chains will stop. Most economies, most businesses will stop, because they depend directly or indirectly on supply chains, which only will keep working if we have abundant cheap oil. So that's very important to understand that, and that's the implications of the fact that we are about to move out of this era that's lasted for about a century, this era of cheap, abundant oil. It's also the same for gas, by the way. Cheap, abundant gas is also very important for other reasons. If you look at the oil discoveries, you can see that the main discoveries were more than half a century ago. Now it's going down, and we've reached a replacement ratio for conventional oil of 16%. I've stopped in 2019 because then with the crisis, the figures that don't mean anything anymore. But what does it mean? 16%. It means that for each barrel of oil that we find, we consume 6. That's what it means. So some people say, there's not going to be enough oil, and others say, there's oil. There's a lot of oil. There's still going to be oil. Always there's going to be oil. People have been saying that we're going to run out of oil for decades, and it's still not the case. In 40 years, we'll still have 40 years left of oil. Blah 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 blah. It's a bit true. There's a lot of oil. There's even too much oil from a climate change point of view. But the problem is not that. The problem is that what happens if we stop having as much oil and abundant, as I say, cheap oil as we need to keep functioning. Our whole societies will stall. They might collapse or decline fast. I don't know what's going to happen. And this has nothing to do with Brexit, by the way. It's an overarching dynamic. it's not a good thing to have less oil if we do not prepare ourselves, if we do not change considerably our societies so that it can function without cheap, abundant oil. And we're not doing that. We're not doing that. So it's a bit of a problem. But then again, yes, there's plenty of oil on the earth. The real question is, will there be plenty of oil, cheap oil, in London, where you are, wherever you are? That's the problem, because it's not a problem of stock, it's a problem of flow. So where does it flow? If there's not enough for everyone, well, who's going to get it? At which price? Who will decide upon with using which criteria, etc.? Those are important questions. Saudi Arabia, its oil revealed that its oil output is very near to the maximum possible that they can produce. They've been lying about this for 20 years. They've been telling the world that if needed, they could, open the tap a little bit, and then the flow will follow, and there's just going to be enough oil. But now they're just said that actually not. Actually, no. We're very close to the ceiling, and now the peak of our oil production is looming ahead. It's probably within 5 years. So people say, yeah, but there's unconventional oil as well, so it can replace the conventional oil. But the thing is that not really, because today, so I don't know if you know Matt Gallagher. For those who know the shale industry, maybe you've heard of his name. He's one of the big bosses of that industry. Basically, that the whole industry is failing. It keeps running because it has government aids, but it's not profitable at all. And they have today they produce less than what they did 3 years ago. So we'll see if they can produce a little more in the future, but it's not going to be enough, because what experts say from Reichstadt, even Patrick Pouyanné, who's the CEO of Total, now called Total Energy, says that before 2025, there's not going to be enough oil in the world, conventional and unconventional put together. There's not going to be enough to reach demand and to meet demand. That's what he says, and other people say the same. So we'll see what happens. But the idea that there's no problem with oil, this idea is a bit naive now. There's going to be problems for you, for me, for other people. We'll see, because it's not going to be the same situation everywhere in the world at the same time. But we're going to have less oil, and more importantly, less cheap oil. And if oil only provides a third of primary energy worldwide, it is needed for everything else. So the peak of oil, of cheap, abundant oil, once again, that peak is pretty much the peak of everything else. Keep that in mind. Also, stress the fact that the UK is a producer of oil, but not a big producer, and France, where I am, even less. So we are dependent on our capacity in the future to import these resources on the constrained market. Besides oil, in the lithosphere, you also have ores, metals mainly. You have many things that we use, and we use them for example, our modern, very sophisticated devices that we love. There's more than 50 different elements in the last generation of smartphones. Just to say that the recycling rate of most of these elements is very low, very, very low in the world as an average, below 1% for everything that is in red here in this image. So there are limits to recycling. And let's take a look at copper. Why? Because we have, and you know it, a very important challenge at hand with climate, and we need to do an energy transition. This energy transition means electrifying many usages, many things that we do, mobility and the way we produce energy. It's more electricity and less thermal energy, blah, blah, blah. All this requires more copper. because it requires electric grids, and electric grids use a lot of copper. Also, electric cars. Electric cars, it's about 80 kilos of copper. An electric car, it's about 80 kilos. A thermal car is about 20 kilos of copper. So anyway, more electricity, decarbonized to some extent, let's say low carbon energy, means more copper. And all the different countries which say, this is our project, when it comes to energy transition, they mean they need more copper, in fact. And more other things. I could talk about lithium, I could talk about cobalt and other things, but it's really, copper is one of the main problems. Why? Because we lack copper? Because there's no more copper? No, there's a lot of copper. But where is it? Autre pays on the top left means other countries. Okay, sorry, it's in French. About a third of all copper resources are in Latin America, and about a fourth are in Chile. And it turns out that in Chile, water is becoming scarce, and extracting copper and lithium also, because Chile also has the most important lithium reserves in the world, requires a lot of water. But see, there's a water crisis. Drought in Chile curbs copper production already. Consequences will be dire. Chile's water crisis is reaching breaking point. Copper faces long-term shortage as demands outruns supply. We're in 2023, and the big energy transition project for the world that we need to survive the climate change crisis just needs a lot of copper, and we are already short on copper. We're already unable to meet demand. Lithium mining is also a problem with indigenous communities, and there's almost a war now in Chile between people who just want to drink and eat and people who want to mine. So what's happening? What's going to happen? I'm not sure. All I can tell you is that in last June in France, there was the World Materials Forum, and the experts on materials just raised the alarm on the shortage of materials for the energy transition. So our big solution to the climate problem is not going to work. It's going to work to some extent until, up to a certain point, but then we're not going to have enough materials to go to the end of those projects. I'm telling you this because there are three components to an energy transition. The first one is producing energy differently. That's renewables mainly. And renewables, that means a lot of materials, a lot of metals, a lot of copper, a lot of sand as well. And we're not going to have enough. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We should do it the best we can, but we should keep in mind that it's not the solution. There are three components to the energy transition. The second one is efficiencies, energy efficiency. And we're getting better at using energy. We use less energy to produce something similar than we did in the past. But this improvement, it doesn't go as fast as it should go for it to be a solution to the climate crisis. It's not as fast at all as it should be. And the third option is sobriety. I don't know if you say this in English. Is that how you say it in English? Sobriety? I hope you can hear me, and I'm not talking.
Yes. Yeah, no. You are talking.
Okay. Sobriety means consuming less, and it's not just efficiency, like consuming less to produce the same. It's producing less. It's the consumer, the final consumer, which consumes less. So we need sobriety means talking about our needs and lowering those needs. So those are the three levers that we can apply. How do you say that? That we can mobilize, that we can use, and we're not using the right ones. We're focusing on the we're focusing on the first two levers, and they're not going to be enough to meet the challenge. Also, draw your attention to the fact that in Europe we don't produce much material, so many ores. So means that we are dependent on our future capacity to import those ores from abroad in more and more constrained and unstable markets. I can talk about sand as well. Some of you may know that we have already a shortage of sand for construction works. I don't know if you know that, but in 2 years, China has used more concrete, therefore more sand, than the US throughout the entire 20th century. It's pretty much incredible. It means it's one of the examples of a terrible acceleration in flows that I talked to you about before. And sand, well, now you have the Burj Khalifa, which is the tallest building in the world in Dubai, which has entirely been built using sand imported from Australia. Entire beaches and entire coastal coasts are being stolen now. They're disappearing. They're stolen by mafias. There's a black market for sand in the world. Let's talk very quickly about phosphorus as well. As shown before, it's one of the boundaries that have been crossed. The cycle of phosphorus is completely disrupted. The actual cycle should be this: there's phosphorus in the ground, in the soil, then plants grow, animals eat those plants, and humans eat either the plants or the animals. But it should go back to the ground, and now it's not going back anymore. In our modern societies, now we do not go back and put our own how do you say that, dejections, our own waste, personal waste. We don't put that back into the fields. Most of us we do what we have to do in water, in drinkable water. On top of that, and the phosphorus and other nutrients go into water courses and into the sea, where it causes problems, ecological problems. So the whole thing is disrupted. So there's very little phosphorus in the soil, and the soil can't grow much. So what we do is that we artificially bring phosphorus to the soil using fertilizers which have phosphorus. But where does that phosphorus come from? Where it comes from many different places, but the main reserves are in Morocco. Experts say that between 70 and 80% of known phosphorus reserves are in the south of Morocco. And this means that we're going to have a problem with phosphorus in the forthcoming decades. If the supply chains of phosphorus, of fertilizers containing phosphorus, if those supply chains stop working in the forthcoming years or decades, we're not going to be able to grow enough food to feed everyone. So also something to keep in mind, that we have to close the loop of phosphorus and other nutrients by bringing those nutrients back onto the fields after it's been treated, of course. So what I'm saying now, I'm talking about energy. I'm talking about raw materials. Is it a problem of energy, the problem of raw materials? It's both, because ores are less and less concentrated, so it requires more and more energy to get the ores. But energy is less and less accessible, so it requires more ores, more materials to produce energy. And one multiplied by the other one, it all adds up to an acceleration. We are reaching limits, and we're reaching them faster and faster. So we're gonna be surprised. We're gonna be taken by surprise by some shortages. We already see some shortages today, but it's nothing compared to what's looming ahead. The second part of the Earth system is the hydrosphere. It's water, underground water, above ground water, and what's in the sky as well. It's every form of water. And this is how the hydrosphere is faring. It's not faring very well. It's bad. You have chemical pollution, a lot of chemical pollution. You have physical pollution. Here, for example, it's in the Philippines. You have pollution on earth, on land, in the seas for humans and animals. And you have pollution inside our own bodies. There was a 2019 study by the WWF, which concluded that in countries like the UK, people on average inhale or eat about 5 grams of plastic in the form of nano or microplastics every week. So that's the equivalent, they say, of a credit card. So each one of us, we eat on average 50 credit cards by year, each year, without even knowing it. And we're not even richer, unfortunately. Another dimension of hydrosphere, which is going wrong, is the corals because of acidification. The corals, it's 25% of marine life which needs corals to develop, to reproduce or to live. So when the corals will disappear, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's not going to be good for the marine ecosystems. It turns out that experts say that if we reach a 2 degrees Celsius global warming, then at least 99% of corals will die. There's warming of the hydrosphere as well, of course. There's the sea level rise is going faster and faster. You have problems of salinization. Is that how you say it? Salinization? Salinization?
Yes. Salinization. Salinization. Right?
Salinization? Of
Salinization.
aquifers?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, something like that. The aquifers becomes saline. And anyway, so this man was in Bangladesh. He was a farmer, and then the aquifer he depended on got salinized somehow, and that's it. Game over for that man. Here you have also phenomena of drought. Here it's le Rhin, the Rhine,
Right.
the Rhine. Is that how you say it?
Yes. Right.
Okay, the Rhine in 2018. It's the Loire, la Loire, one of the 4 big French rivers, which was dry this year, this summer. And you also have hypoxic areas with little or no oxygen left, and the whole ecosystems there collapse. It's not new, but it's multiplying at a faster and faster rate. And we're using water and water ecosystems more and more. Aquaculture and now deep sea mineral mining and other things. And so our pressure on the marine and aquatic ecosystems is greater and greater. The third part of the Earth system is the cryosphere. It's actually a sub part of the hydrosphere because it's water, but it's water and it's oops. Come on. I don't know why it's not working. Oh, come on. All right. It's water in ice in its solid form. So everything that's icy. And it's melting. There's this 2019 special report from the IPCC, which concluded that it's melting faster than models could predict. Now, if you look at Arctic sea ice volume, this is what you can see. I don't know why it's not starting. No. No. Okay, for some reason it doesn't work. It worked just before. So anyway, the sea ice area is decreasing, but the volume as well is decreasing fast, and also the density of ice is decreasing fast. Now, the Arctic has warmed 4 times faster than the rest of the planet in the past 4 decades. The fourth part of the Earth system is the atmosphere. You know what it is? Well, when it comes to the atmosphere, we can say this: the concentration of CO2 has been reaching all-time highs almost. Now it's far above the natural cycles that we can observe in the past 800,000 years. We're above 420 ppm. It's, according to the IPCC, the highest concentration in at least 2 million years. when it comes to temperature, that's in the past 2,000 years, that's what it looks like. The average global temperature, surface temperature, in the past 2,000 years. So you can see we're not in a cycle at all. So people keep saying, "Hey, it's a cycle." No, it's not. It's not a cycle anymore. We're beyond the normal variability. If you look at how the temperature has evolved since the pre-industrial era, this is what it looks like. So here on this animation, you can see that the green circle is the zero. It's the zero circle, 0 degrees Celsius. It's the reference, meaning that it's the average temperature between 1850 and 90, which is the reference time, which is pre-industrial era. So if it's below, as you can see, it was a lot until the 1970s, it means it's cooler than the average between 1850 and 90. But then, this is what happens in the past 50 years. Now, as you can see, it's getting warmer, but more importantly, what you can see is that the warming is going faster and faster. So do not project yourself in the future, into the future, in a linear way. It's going to get worse, but it's going to get worse at an ever faster rate, unless we change considerably the way our societies work, but we'll come to that later. If we had taken the right measures 20 years ago to remain below the 2 degrees threshold, would have been, I'm not saying easy, but it would have been feasible. But every year we wait, every year we fail to curb down the emissions, makes it harder and harder and probably out of reach. That's also something you should keep in mind. And some people say that in London in 2050, the climate will be similar to that of Barcelona today. It's not true. It doesn't mean anything. That's just a linear continuation of the present and of the past. It's not true. What happens is that if we do not curb our emissions by 2050, every year in London, you will have several days between 45 and 50 degrees Celsius. A few days, almost every year, statistically speaking. And that means what? That a few people will die because of heat, because of that heat wave. No, what it means, the most important thing is that trees are not going to survive. Is that most of our crops will not survive. So it's ecological disruptions beyond what you can imagine, and it's societal disruptions beyond what we can imagine. That's what it means. It's not going to be nice as it is nice to live in Barcelona today, in London in 2050. So why are we failing to decrease those greenhouse gas emissions? Why on earth? You have the answer. You have the answer. I'm going to ask you a question and you're going to answer it by yourself. Have you, or has anyone around you in the past 20 years actually really changed their way of life? Have you really changed what your expectations for the future, the nature of your dreams and ambitions? Not really. Most of us haven't done that. Most of us are just, adjusting, making some adjustments in our way of life, but the society remains the same. Well, there you are. You have the answer to that question. The next two slides are in French. I'm sorry, but I don't know if there's an equivalent study for the UK. I'm just telling you, I guess it's somehow similar between France and the UK. In France, the average carbon footprint of a French citizen is about 9.9 CO2 equivalent tons per person and per year. And it's mostly the car, on the left-hand side, it's mobility. So it's mainly use of individual cars. The second is about how you heat your home, gas and fuel, and then the third part is meat. But to to be within the requirements of the Paris Agreement, we would need within the next 30 years to go from 9.9 CO2 equivalent tons per person to 2. And going from 10 to 2, dividing by 5 is not going to happen by eating a little less meat and not taking planes anymore, not flying anymore, on the other side of the planet if you don't have to, and maybe sharing, carpooling and stuff like that. It's not going to be enough. The actual thing, the reality that people do not tell you is that going from the first line to the second line here means a different society. It means a different civilization. It means that you can't have everything you want whenever you want. It means that you have to curb down everything by a lot. And I mean everything. And I'm not sure we can do it. I'm not sure it's even feasible. Yesterday, someone talked about the wicked problem. You may be familiar with this concept. Are we facing a wicked problem? A problem which has no actual way out, a predicament? I'm not sure. We'll see. What I can tell you is that the strategies that we have, and when people tell you that we can maintain our way of life by putting some wind turbines and solar cells and electric cars, it's not true. It's not true. The fifth dimension of the Earth system is the biosphere. It's everything that's alive, however big or small. And there are many, many, many studies. I'm going to talk to you about this one. They've reconstructed the dynamics of populations of vertebrates between 1970 and 2018. So 48 years, almost 32,000 populations of vertebrates everywhere in the world. What we can see is that there are the populations are declining almost everywhere. Sorry, I need to drink. Yeah, sorry about that. And what we can see, so there are decline rates everywhere, and if you calculate the average, the mean of these decline rates, you get 69% in 48 years. So we can say for sure that life on Earth is collapsing. It's incredible to say such sentences. But I'm saying it. Life on Earth is collapsing as we speak. In Europe, I don't know if you've heard about that. In France, namely, birds in the countryside have with 1/3 of countryside birds have disappeared in 15 years. In Northern Europe, over 75% of the flying insect biomass, has disappeared in 27 years. If you look at the populations of mammals on Earth today, marine mammals and earth mammals, you get around 62% of the biomass of the mammals, which are represented by livestock and pets as well. 34% of the biomass is humans, and there's 4% left for wild mammals, for wildlife. Here we are. And also, by the way, some people explain to us that it's not a situation we can get out of easily. The impact we have on biodiversity will take millions of years to recover. And when we say recover, it doesn't mean that we're going to ever go back to the situation that used to exist. It's impossible. What's lost is lost forever. But when they say recover, they mean go back to a level of biodiversity which is similar to what we have today. The sixth and last dimension of the Earth system is the pedosphere. It's the soil, and what the soil experts tell us is that 75% of soils are degraded by human activities. 1/3 is heavily degraded by those activities. Right, so until now, I didn't tell you what I think. I just told you what I know, because people, skilled people, competent people have come up with those conclusions. It's the observed state of the Earth system. And then you have the anthroposphere, which is the sphere of human activities or human constructions, past ones, recent ones. You have the products and objects that we produce. You have waste and pollution and us. That's the anthroposphere. And the anthroposphere, as I told you before, is booming with booming impacts on the natural systems. We are today in a situation which is called overshoot. So earlier, I showed you 4 graphs. There was a black line and the dotted line. It's the same lines. It's the same curves here. The only thing is that the dotted line is here green, and the other one is red. And we've been above biocapacity for a few decades, about 50 years, according to the Global Footprint Network. And the red curve is going to go back down underneath the green curve. I'm telling you that it's a certainty. It can be demonstrated. So do we understand? Do we now begin to understand what's going on? I can't hear you right now. I'm thinking that some of you, perhaps many of you, think the answer to this question is yes. We understand. But the real answer is no, we do not. When I told you about all these things, I told you before I told you about all these things, I told you it was a systemic problem. Now, is looking at the different dimensions of that problem a systemic analysis? It is not. It's a multi-dimensional analysis, but it's not systemic yet. So now we know there are problems, and there are serious challenges. Okay, we know that. But we still do not know how all these things connect to each other, how they actually form one big dynamic, one big problem. Let me explain to you. We'll not find the right solutions if we don't look at the right problems. And my question is climate change a problem, like a fundamental problem we need to find a solution to? I'm telling you, it's not. It's just a symptom of the problem, the overarching problem, which is this one. We live in a civilization which is a machine that turns nature into waste. There's a bit of recycling going on, but very little. It's a linear process. We extract resources, we transform them with energy into goods, services, and human activities, and then at the other end, downstream, we produce waste and pollution. Now, these waste and pollution, they come in 3 forms: solid, liquid, and gaseous. And among the gases, you have greenhouse gases, which are not good for our climate. So climate change is just one of many symptoms of that big problem. If, for example, if we produce low carbon energy, is it good? Well, yes, it is for the climate. From a climate point of view, it will calm down this symptom, which is pretty good. It's pretty useful because it's a very, very serious symptom. It can kill us. So good. But if we don't change anything else, it will still be energy to fuel a machine that turns nature into waste. Now, why is it very important to make the difference between symptoms and problems? Let me explain that with a metaphor. It's not a very pleasant metaphor, but at least it's efficient. It's effective. Imagine that you have headaches. Imagine that you also have skin problems and you have digestive issues. If you take all these things as problems, well, I have good news. There are solutions. Paracetamol, cream, herbal tea. And if you take all 3 of them, well, you're going to solve all your different problems. Small adjustments, small everyday adjustments in your lifestyle, but you can keep living normally. You don't have to question everything in the way you live. So yeah, that's it. Unless, imagine that all these different problems are just symptoms of the fact that you have a cancer. Well, are you going to cure the cancer with paracetamol, cream, and herbal tea? The answer is no. And you need to understand this. there is a fundamental difference between tackling the problem, actually, solving the problem, and just putting together, adding all the different treatments to all the different symptoms. Now, if we get back to climate change, it's one of the symptoms. If we decarbonize our whole societies, which is probably, I don't know if it's feasible, but it's one of the biggest challenges. It's probably the biggest challenge humanity has ever had to meet. If we manage that, wow, that will be impressive, but that will be paracetamol. If we manage to solve the water crisis, it will be cream. If we manage to secure our supply of critical strategic materials, it will be herbal tea. And the problem, the cancer, will still be there. If we do not tackle the problem, meaning going back by ourselves underneath the dotted line or the green one, by decreasing the flows of materials and energy, and by regenerating our ecosystemic, but our natural systems, I wanted to say, if we don't regenerate natural systems, if we don't do all that, there's no solution. So you have people working on getting the materials from the lithosphere. You have people working on water and many problems dealing with water. Good. Okay, people working on the melting of the ice and the implications of that. People working on the atmosphere, for example, air pollution. You have people working on protecting trees or mangroves or coral reefs, or I don't know whichever species, and that's good. Of course, it's good. People working on the soil and agriculture mainly, and people working on many, many, many different problems within the anthroposphere. Okay, people do all that. And once we deal with all that, we have paracetamol plus cream plus herbal tea. If we maintain the idea that we could solve all these problems without changing fundamentally the way our society works, we are wrong. It's not going to happen. It's not going to work, and it's not working. What are the implications of all that? We are going towards an energy and material descent. We're going to have less energy, less raw materials. I don't know how it's going to happen. Maybe we're going to have, for a while, a little bit more of this and that, and a little bit less of that and this. Maybe, I'm not sure. But overall, everyone on Earth in the forthcoming decades will have less energy and less raw materials. And that will happen as there is a climate regime change, as there are ecological disruptions, as there's a scarcity of more and more equipment and resources and shortages and societal destabilization and conflicts, more and more problems, less and less energy and raw materials. That's what's happening. It's probably started already, and it's a big process. Now, the question is, which descent? Sorry, there's a problem with the image for some reason. Which descent? Do we keep growing increasing our pressure on the environment? Do we think, for example, that to solve the climate crisis, what we need is renewables and new cars and batteries? Well, if you do that, and just that, we intensify the material extraction. And by doing that, we destroy ecosystems. We pollute a lot. We use a lot of water. And so is that a solution to build renewables and electric cars? Is that a solution? Well, from the climate change perspective, perhaps, yeah, maybe it is. So good. I have nothing against that. But from the other perspective, biodiversity, pollution, water, no, it's not a solution. It's a problem. So you need to know that, so you can do your own choices, your own how do you say, trade-offs. So either we understand that we need to organize this energy and material descent, or we keep growing, but this energy and material descent will be forced upon us in ways that we have not yet started to imagine. Vulnerabilities of our societies. we depend on transportation systems, which all needs abundant cheap oil. Even trains which run on electric, they need oil to work, because you need to maintain the tracks. You need to the people who work for the company, they go to work with their car, etc., etc. In France, for example, they've concluded in this very good publication. They've concluded that people who live in cities, 97.9% of what they eat comes from somewhere else. Only 2.1% is produced locally. And it's of course, because the different places, different communities, they've had to be in order to be competitive, they've had to specialize in the production of some things, a certain number of things, not that many. So pretty much everything we produce, we export. Pretty much everything we consume, we import, comes from somewhere else. And that's how the system has organized itself, because it was taking as a premise the fact that we would have forever abundant cheap oil. Well, unfortunately, we're about to leave that era, as I said before. Another vulnerability is that we depend on infrastructure and networks, energy networks, electricity networks. You have telecommunication, you have water and gas, natural gas. And all these systems require immense amounts of energy and raw materials, metals, sand, and other things, to just keep working. Now, people want to build huge new infrastructure. Okay, why not? But what I'm telling you is that in the forthcoming decades, we will not have enough material to maintain the existing infrastructure. It's already the case in many places in the world. In the United States, for example, in the poorest states, or maybe counties, in the poorest counties, they do not have the means anymore to maintain their roads. Therefore, you have bulldozers taking away the roads, and they start from scratch again. They're on sand tracks. Can you say that? They, anyway.
Dirt roads.
Dirt roads?
I can't hear you very well. Anyway, so no roads anymore. A third vulnerability is this. You may think that technologies are the solution. They're not. They've never been. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But they can be useful. They can be used in the framework of a project which contributes to a solution, but they're not the solution. In fact, if you look at technologies, they have enabled many great things, but they've also produced a lot of problems. And today there's a complexity problem because we do not know how to solve a problem without adding more complexity. And if you want to read about that, there's a very brilliant book. It's an old book now. It's 30 years old. It's a very great book which is called The Collapse of Complex Societies by Joseph Tainter, and it's a must read to me. You'll understand the nature of technology and nature of complexity, and you understand why there's just so much we can do to maintain a certain level of complexity in a society. It requires energy to maintain that level of complexity. So we are dependent now on technologies. We love them. It makes us more efficient. It optimizes many things. Okay, good, but only as long as it works. The way it stops working, the day it stops working, the day the systems that are in place to repair or intervene when there's a shutdown, when it stops working for some reason. One day, the day it stops, sorry, it's not easy to explain for me in English. The day that what's been designed to intervene in case you have a problem with your device stops, well, then it's game over. So it doesn't mean that you should not use technology. It means that you should have a backup plan for when the technology fails, and for when the system that should intervene to make it work again fails as well. It will happen. That day will happen. Now, if it's for something, if you have that problem, if it doesn't work anymore, but it's not vital, you know, it's not that serious, it's not that grave. But then, when it comes to our security, when it comes to producing our food, when it comes to transport, it would be good not to bet everything we have on technology that will not be sustained more than a few years or decades. What happens then? We need a backup plan. So, facing all of that, we have solutions. But wait a minute, I'm not there yet, because see, I'm not talking about real solutions. I'm talking here about the solutions we've been sold, and basically almost all of these solutions, they fall under a certain category, which is they fall under the general name of sustainable development. That's what we talk about. And sustainable development has been coined in officially 1987. So what is sustainable development? What is sustainable? What does it mean? You may think that something which is sustainable is something which can be sustained, something which can last. Well, yes, but no, not here. When we talk about sustainable development, you need to remember that the people who came up with the concepts are mostly economists. And economists, everything they see, everything they understand and simulate and theorize about the world comes down to capital. So sustainable development actually is this: we should leave future generations a total amount of capital that is at least equivalent to the amount of capital that we have today. If the amount of capital doesn't decrease over time, then it is sustainable. That's what it actually means. But there's a catch. Here you have Jean-Baptiste Say. It's French. He's a French economist, and he was almost 200 years ago. Sorry, he was one of the fathers of the classical school of thought in economy. Now in economics, there's almost only one school of thought. It's called neoclassical, and the neoclassical theory, it uses exactly the same hypotheses as the classical theory. Today, everywhere in the world, the economic and macroeconomic models that we use are governments and institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and everything. What they in Brussels as well, in Washington, all the models that they use are neoclassical. They use a certain number of hypotheses, assumptions, and here are two of them. The first one, it goes back to almost 200 years, and Jean-Baptiste Say wrote, "Natural resources are infinite, otherwise we would not get them for free. Since they can be neither multiplied nor exhausted, they are not the subject of economics." Today, what we use, the models we use, have started for about 20 years to include some sort of resources, natural resources, but the fact that those resources are exhaustible is not taken into account. By construction, our economic models believe they assume that that resources are infinite. Now, there's another hypothesis which is very important. It's called the substitutability of capital, and the different forms of capital are interchangeable. We owe that to several economists. One of the most famous is this man, Robert Solow, an American, who said he did say it in front of the American Economic Association. The world can, in effect, get along without natural resources. So exhaustion is just an event, not a catastrophe. Thank you, Mr. Solo. He had the Nobel Prize in economics, by the way. And this man said that, well, all different forms of capital are substitutable. What does it mean? So I mean, what does sustainable mean from this point of view? As I said, sustainable means that the amount of capital doesn't change over time. But as there are different types of capital which are interchangeable, imagine something. Imagine that for it, I hope it's not going to happen, but imagine that we cut down all trees on Earth, all the trees. If you let them rot on the ground, well, you lose the capital. Okay, it's just a waste of capital. But if you use them for something else, if you transform the trees into sorry, into tools, into buildings, and factories, into furniture, whatever, it's not a loss of capital. It's just a change from one form to another form of capital. It is sustainable. That's what it means. Now, this idea of sustainability was criticized at the beginning of the 1990s by a group of economists and scientists. Sorry, I need to drink. And that's it. And they said, it's stupid. It doesn't work. It's no way is this sustainable. They said for it to be sustainable, you would have to meet more criteria. For example, you do not extract resources faster than it can renew. You do not produce waste faster than the system can absorb that waste, etc., and a few other things. So now that we have this other point of view on sustainability, there are two schools of thought. The first one, the one I told you about, Robert Solow and stuff, the neoclassical view of the sustainable development, it's called weak sustainability. And the new way, the other way people think is strong sustainability. You can look it up on the internet easily, and you'll see you can go deeper into that. It's very, very important to understand the difference between strong and weak sustainability. And when we talk about sustainable development, it is always weak sustainability. It's sustainability in its weak form. And there is the conclusion. In a world with finite resources, weak sustainability is unsustainable. Period. So that doesn't mean that everything that comes out of sustainable development is wrong or useless or counterproductive. It doesn't mean that. You have many people working in this field. We have with good intentions, with some of them are very clever, and there are many interesting things which are useful. But the overall concept and the overall dynamic of sustainable development does not work. It can only provide some mitigation. What happens ever since we've introduced sustainable development, and it's now being greatly generalized in many areas. What we see, the impact of that is that the problem is still getting worse, but slower than it would be getting worse if we didn't have sustainable development. It's not sustainable at all. It's just less worse. It's less destructive. And that's the best we can have through sustainable development. But, technology will save us. Won't it? Let me take an example of technology as it is introduced to us as a solution. There are many people now working on mobility as a service, or sometimes it's called transportation as a service. And they tell you that we're going to have autonomous electric vehicles everywhere in the world within 10, 20 years. And it's going to be a great progress, and it's going to solve many crises at the same time. The climate crisis, the energy crisis. It's going to solve also the problem of traffic, because it's real-time optimized, and so you can work in your car, be more productive. You can also rest or read and be nice and relaxed in your car, which makes you more productive. So it's a good thing for the economy and everything. It's a solution. People today are putting billions on the table to develop this. There are many cities now in the world, several, not many, so several cities which have started actually moving forward with this project. Here it's Pittsburgh in the U.S. And you have reports like this one. You should read this. You should read this one with a critical mind, which said that there would be 20 million transportation as a service vehicles in the U.S. alone within 10 years. So you should read it. And then that woman works for Intel, and she even talks about hundreds of millions of vehicles. We're talking about the same, we're talking about autonomous vehicles here. And she says there's a data challenge. Well, of course there's a data challenge, and I'm going to tell you why. Because if we look at how much data one electric car generates, it's below. So there's a low and high range. It's between 0.4 and 5.1 terabytes of data per vehicle per hour, because of all the high definition cameras and stuff. So that generates that. If we had hundreds of millions of vehicles, that would generate so much data in real time traveling on networks that it doesn't make any sense. I've made some calculations because I'm an engineer, and I've come up with the following conclusion. Imagine that we would have just the 20 million vehicles that these guys, Rethink X, we're talking about. Imagine just those 20 million vehicles. You know how much data that would be traveling on the networks? That would be the equivalent of 12 times the World Wide Web. That would be just impossible. So it's not going to happen. Maybe there will be some autonomous cars like this. There are some already, even if they're not fully autonomous. But it's a gadget. It's not a solution. We should not waste time on following these people with their crazy, great, creative ideas. Technology is not a solution. It never will be. It can be a tool that helps putting together a solution, but technology just responds to technical problems, technical issues, not systemic issues. When you understand that our situation is not just an addition of different technical issues, but just a systemic problem, you understand that technology is not the right tool. Now, the problem is that when the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. And that's exactly what we do. We have some tools. Technology is part of those tools. We love it. We're good at it. So we want our tool to be useful. So what do? Well, we focus on the problems that the tool can actually solve. And the rest, we leave it. We don't address it. Namely, the most important issues of all, the systemic issue, we don't address it. And the ones who think they want to or they can address it, what do? Do they develop new tools, new systemic tools to address those systemic problems? No. What they do is that they change their perception of the problem so that it corresponds to the tools that they already master. So that's what we do. And so far, no one yet has correctly, to my mind, addressed the systemic issue we're facing. Just to finish the first part of my intervention, the second part is much shorter, but it's also much denser. I would say that all the projects, technological and political projects that are presented to you, they are based on the idea that we can decouple. There can be a decoupling between economy and the pressure the human activities exert on the environment. That we could have more economy, more GDP, and less impact. As you understand, this impact is manifold. It has many dimensions. It's not just greenhouse gases. It's pollution, and greenhouse gases is one form of pollution. It's extraction of materials and resources. It's also destruction of ecosystems. So we would need, for green growth to be possible, we would need to have more economy, more goods and services, more added value from a GDP point of view, but less pollution. We should use less resources, and we should regenerate ecosystem instead of destroying them. Is this what's happening? No, it's not. Not at all. It never has, and it never will. This decoupling is impossible. We use more and more material. We use actually more material today to produce 1 point of GDP than we used 20 years ago to produce the same point of GDP. I'm talking in constant dollars. And it's not me who says it. If you want to check it out, you can read the reports by the recent reports by the International Resource Panel, which is exactly like the IPCC, but for resources. For green growth to be possible, we will need to have more economy, but less pollution. No, we have more and more. We will need to have less destruction of ecosystems. No, we need more and more. But people tend to focus on greenhouse gases, and many times even on just CO2. And they say, yeah, but decoupling is working. There are countries that have managed to decrease their greenhouse gas emissions and still have a positive rate of economic growth. And it's true. About 20 countries have managed to do that, not every year, but some years in the past 20 years. So now you can hear, maybe you've heard about it, you can hear people saying, yeah, we know how to do it, so it's great. We're there, we're on the right path. And they take those examples of certain countries which have managed this decoupling. Now, climate change is a planetary issue. We share one and only atmosphere. So to solve the climate issue, we need to have a solution. We wouldn't need to have a solution that is generalizable to the whole planet, which can be generalized to the whole planet. Is that possible? Because a few countries have managed to decouple, is that something that we can, generalize? No, because the countries that have been able to decouple are of two kinds. The first kind is countries which have an enormous amount of countries which have, let's say, specific natural resources, for example, a lot of potential for hydroelectricity, and that can produce their energy through hydroelectricity, like Norway, for example. So obviously what Norway can do can't be done in most other countries. And then the other countries which have managed to do that are all of them very rich countries. And those very rich countries, if they were able to do that, it's because they have focused their economy on services, on the service economy, on activities which yield a lot of added value when it comes to producing GDP, but have rather a low carbon footprint. But if those countries can do it, it's only because everything that they use, their cars, their computers, the materials for their homes, the solar panels that they put in their grid, is produced somewhere else. Is produced by other countries, mainly in Asia, which are very dirty, which have all the heavy industry, which is highly emissive. And if our countries are able to decouple, it's because other countries will never be able to decouple. Never. So, no, it's not a good news that some countries have managed to decouple if it's not possible to generalize it to the whole planet. There's no decoupling. Therefore, there is no way any type of green growth is possible. And I'm not talking to you as an advocate of degrowth. I am not. I'm an engineer. I'm trying just to explain to you that the ideology of green growth, and some people, they just believe it, they just believe it's possible, is wrong. It's just, it doesn't make any sense from a systemic and from a Earth system point of view. GDP worldwide GDP has exploded in the past 200 years, and you cannot have more GDP with less energy. Even if we're more and more efficient in the way we use energy, you can't have more GDP with less energy worldwide again. So more GDP means more energy. And some of you may say, yeah, more energy, but less greenhouse gases because we are decarbonizing energy production, aren't we? Not really. We are doing it. Of course, wind and solar are booming, but still, even though they're booming, today, well, here the graphic stops at 2019, but even today in 2022, 85% of the world energy is produced using fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. So maybe we're starting to decarbonize, but not fast enough. Really, not fast enough for it to be a solution. We need to consume less, and that means degrowth, some degrowth of some sort. I'm sorry for the people who think that degrowth advocates are crazy, and well, no. What's crazy is to think that we can keep growing. It doesn't make any sense from a physical point of view. To finish my first part, I'm talking about the COPs. You know, every year you have those big congresses, international congresses, and you can see, and all the process, the international process, is organized according to rules that are stipulated in one document. It's the UNFCCC. United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And you can see Article 3, paragraph 5, you can find it online easily, that it says that we need sustainable economic growth and sustainable development, and that's weak sustainability, and we need not to hinder international trade. So basically, what we're trying to achieve through these COPs is this: we are trying to solve a problem without being too demanding on the system that creates the problem. It's not going to work. It's not working. You see the global CO2 concentration. This is how it's evolving, and this is now the beginning of the COPs. Since the beginning of the COPs, so see. It's still getting worse and worse, and slightly faster every year. So without the COPs, it would probably be even worse. So it has a potential of mitigation, but it has a mitigation potential. But that's it. It will not solve the problem. It never has and never will, because all the ideology behind it is a sustainable development, and sustainable development is weak sustainability. It is unsustainable. Now, how do we react to all that? I need to develop this. I need, let's say, a good half hour, 35 more minutes. And then we have about 40 minutes for Q&A. Is that good? Is that okay with you?
Let me check the time.
Yeah, it's 12:35. It's 10. Sorry, it's 10.
We have 40 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Because we were supposed to finish at 1 London time.
Yes, and it's
12:20. So we only have 40 minutes left. Yes.
Oh, come on, my timer has gone wrong. So my timer shows me something else. Okay, I'll be as fast as I can. Now it's important, but it's dense. It can go fast. How do we react to all that? First, it happens in our heads. That's the sphere of ideas. We need to deconstruct some ideas. The first idea to deconstruct is that they are solutions. No, they are not solutions. There's a big wave, a big tsunami coming, and we're going to take it. Now, what I can teach you to some extent is how to surf, how to deal with the wave, but not how to avoid it. We need to first of all, to tell stories differently, because the way we tell stories, stories about the future, the way we envision the future, it influences our perception of what the future could or should be. And I'm telling you that the war between different visions of the future is underway. It has started. Many people think that we can go, to infinity and beyond. That's the main vision of the future today in the world. But then some people are starting to understand that it's not going to happen, and most of them, they're reacting in a way that they're reorganizing themselves between, within their community, or sometimes individualistically. So people think that, yeah, they're going to organize their resilience where they are, and they don't care about the rest. And then it's going to be, the future will be them against the other. So the growing vision of the future now is us against them, and it doesn't work. I'm telling you, as a specialist of resilient systems, the ones who thrive, the ones who survive, in some cases, when energy and materials lack, are the ones who collaborate, who cooperate. So we need to make sure that there's this other vision of the world, which is us with them, which this vision of the world must win, and it's not winning right now. So it's up to every one of us to build or contribute to building inspiring visions that convey hopes, because we need hope to act, but lucid hopes, things that can happen. I don't know. Oh, okay. And then there's the sphere of acts, what we actually do. All that you read from the IPCC and from many experts is either mitigation or adaptation. How we make the problem less destructive, and how we adapt our systems. But mitigation is underway. It's not going fast enough, and it's not working when it comes to climate change, for example. Adaptation is it requires to change our societies, to change our model of society, and that is not something which is easy to do. Maybe it's impossible to do. So we need to take into account the possibility that we will not succeed, and we need resilience, but not the resilience that you hear about usually. That is always one specific type of resilience. In the face of one specific type of issues, of crisis. What we need right now is a collective resilience, not individual resilience, not community resilience only. It's broader than that. It's not a technical resilience of subsystems, of institutions, of a company, whatever. It's global, collective, and maybe even societal resilience in the face of what? Not such specific type of problem, but any type of crisis which is lasting, which lasts for a long time, maybe forever, and a crisis which touches us where we are the most vulnerable. For example, what happens if the supply chains stop for some medicines, for some things that are that we can't produce food without, and that what happens if those supply chain disruptions never stop, if it's forever. That's the kind of resilience we need. So when we talk about resilience, you need to ask yourself, and for example, your company or your university or whatever, how do we become sustainable and resilient? And we can adapt, our way of life, our practices, business models, strategies, decision-making protocols, indicators, objectives, priorities, all that. Okay. But that's from your point of view. How do I become resilient and sustainable? How do my company, my organization becomes sustainable and resilient? But there's another dimension that we hardly ever talk about, which is the most important one to me, is how you become agents of global resilience, societal resilience. So in the first part, you're only doing the best you can for yourself at your level. On the second hand, the the red part, becoming agents of societal resilience. It means becoming engaged, implying yourself in a dynamic, in a movement, in a cultural change. For example, let me give you some example. To build resilience, we need food production systems that can be operated and maintained forever within a reasonable geographic area, not depending on machines that themselves depend on chips, which are only produced at the other at the other end of the world, not depending on cheap and abundant oil, because we do not control that. We need food production systems that work even without what I'm just saying. But the same, and to eat today, to be able to produce food, what do we need? We need seeds that we do not produce by ourselves. They're produced abroad, most of them. We need cheap energy, which we do not produce. We need fertilizers, which require a lot of oil and or natural gas, which we do not produce most of it. We need machines that we do not know how to repair anymore. They're too complicated, too sophisticated. And we need people who come from abroad. As I was telling yesterday in another discussion, I don't exactly know how it works in the UK. All I can tell you is that in France, and I believe it's pretty much the same with you, most of our food is produced by people from abroad who come every year, people who are specialized, who are skilled, and who cost nothing. And they will only keep coming as long as there's cheap, abundant oil. So we need to move forward autonomy from the whole, from one end to the other of the whole value chain when it comes to many things, including food. We need also energy production systems that can be operated and maintained within a reasonable geographic area. You need to, if you're interested in these topics, take a look at what we can do with materials that are bio-based or geo-based, geologically based materials that you have within a manageable, reasonable area. When it comes to transportation systems, also we need mobility offers that can be maintained within a manageable geographic area. There's a lot of talk about new vehicles, new engines. We're going to replace thermal engines by electric engines. It's not the right question to ask. I'm not saying there's no question here, but it's not the first question to ask. We first need to think about new transportation systems and new offers. And this responds to what uses we need, what's to be sustainable in terms of mobility. So we need to think about new uses. And this needs first a reassessment of our needs in terms of mobility. And that's the question, that's a whole discussion about an alternative model of society, because mobility and the model of society are closely linked. It's a systemic and cultural approach. Once we've done that, we can talk about batteries and electric engines. The real question we should ask in terms of mobility is, how can anyone, anywhere, even at the end, in the countryside, live a satisfying life, meet their everyday needs, ensure their safety, fulfill themselves in a sustainable fashion without having to own a vehicle, whether it's an electric or thermal vehicle, doesn't matter. That's a real question. Today, you can't answer that question. Well, I'm telling you that if we don't find proper answers to that question, within 10 or 15 years, it's going to be chaos. Take a look at low tech. Low tech is not just, it's not no tech. There can be tech in low tech, but the right amount of tech. And I would recommend you to go on Wikipedia and take a look at the low tech article. You will find this this infographic with the legend, and you will understand the different dimensions of low tech. It's doing the right thing, responding, providing for basic needs in a sustainable fashion. It's strong sustainability here, in a resilient way, including encompassing a cultural transformation. Take a look at it. We need to preserve agricultural land, whatever. Now, if someone or a company or an investor from abroad wants to buy some agricultural land and transform it, artificialize it, we need to say stop, even if that requires to get into some sort of resistance. We need that because it's the future. We need it's vital. For that, agroecology is one of the key as well. We need to exploit and the soil, but and the agricultural areas, but in a sustainable fashion. And agroecology is the way forward. I'm not the one saying it. Many reports from the UN, notably, have concluded that for more than 15 years now. We're still not going in that direction. The best we can do is organic. Organic is better, but it's not good. Organic is still very destructive most of the times. Not every time, but most of the time. Vegetation for food in urban areas. It's a good way to have people work together around producing their own local food, learning important skills and basic knowledge. And also, as I said, working together around food. Food is important to everyone. So it's something we should work on as a society. How you make sure that there is vegetation for food in cities mainly and in suburban areas as well. The nutrient cycles should be closed. I've already talked about it when I talked about phosphorus. We need to make sure that our dejection, our feces and urine, mainly urine, because 65% of phosphorus is in the urine, is then treated in a certain way. We know how to do it and used as intrants and put back into fields. And it works very well, but we need to do it. So that means having other equipment in cities and making sure that our waste does not go into the rivers. We need to organize short food supply chains and local economies. This is very important because when there's going to be the big crisis, I don't know when and how it's going to unfold, but it's going to happen. The big economic crisis, to make sure that the people who produce the food where you are in your in your community and around your community, to make sure that they do not collapse, that they can keep working even if they're not profitable anymore in the eyes of the system. Well, they can have their own system with local currencies, for example, and you can still have producers and consumers and restaurant owners and stuff who work together locally, and they keep working together locally, even if the economy collapses. We need redundancies in the system and backups. You cannot have a system which, for a very important function or feature, depends upon one thing which may stop working one day. So you need to have backups, especially what I said before. If you have a technical or technological system, you need to have a backup which is not technical or technological, or differently. We need to build stockpiles, but collective stockpiles. If everyone does a stockpile and becomes a hoarder in its own home, but then there's going to be a war between hoarders and people who have not made stockpiles the day we need those resources. So if everyone does it or not individually, it's not enough. We need collectively managed stockpiles. And we need solidarity and inclusiveness. If you don't work towards all that, if you don't work with people who are from different communities or different than you, it's not going to work. It's still going to be people within their communities against other communities. So we need to work collectively with different who are not like us, I would say, who do not have the same cultural referentials. We need a collective governance of the commons. I'm not the first one to talk about it, but we need to ask ourselves the question of our needs. What are our needs, and how are their needs are these needs satisfied? And then what the resources that the satisfaction of these needs depends on, those resources must be preserved and collectively managed over time. Very, very important. And again, and the last idea I want to throw you is this: we could organize that the essentials are guaranteed for all. the access to the essentials. So first of all, you work on agroecology, for example, for the food, and new production systems which do not depend on things which come from abroad, um, with be it technologies, be it people and their skills, be it energy and cheap abundant oil. You make the whole food production chain resilient. You also work on how to govern, how to collectively manage those resources, and then there's access to those resources. Well, you can guarantee the essentials for all. For example, the first liters of water, the first gallons of water, the first kilowatt hours of electricity, first cubic meters of gas, etc., would be available to everyone for a very little price, at a very, very low price. And then that's just to survive. So everyone can survive. That's something a society should ensure. But then if you consume more, you pay, and you very quickly pay much more expensive. So if you consume a lot, you pay a lot. And that means that it doesn't cost the community or society anything. Okay, those who consume a lot pay for the others. That's something which can work, but that's something which will not work, which will not come the state, the government, come from the state or the government. A state or a government cannot put this type of idea into practice because it's too big of a change, and we haven't yet tested it, so nobody knows what would happen, and it's experimental. And that's precisely why it can only come from the local level through experiments. And we need those experiments. And it doesn't matter who organizes these experiments. It could be elected officials, it could be institutions, it could be the state or the local state, local authorities. It could also be a university. It could also be one or several companies, local companies. It could also be people, just citizens, you coming together and trying to do what it takes to experiment things. Why is it? And this through participative projects with different types of people. And you should try to do that one way or another, participate or empower people so that they can do that. Do whatever you can, because that's the key for tomorrow's future. The big changes that we need, they will not come from the state because it's too big a change, and it's experimental. So they're not gonna take the chance, even if they wanted to, which they don't. But we can, as I said again, we can experiment, test, and I hope validate a few things locally, so that when the time comes, when there's a tipping point, not the right one, not the tipping point that we are going to be able to organize, because I don't believe we will be able to organize any tipping point, but the tipping point that is imposed upon us, a bad tipping point. At this moment, there will be chaos, and in this time of chaos, people will need to have a plan B, which has already been validated, and that's when you come on and you say, "Hey, we've tried that and it worked." That's a part of the solution. And if you do that and other things and experiment different things in terms of resilience, then in the end, we might have a puzzle, different pieces of a puzzle, which put together are a new model of society, a solution, in short. Anyway, I'm finished now. I'm just saying as a conclusion that we are in an artificializing system, and we need to try to move on to a regenerating system and come up with inspiring alternatives. The most important word is inspiring. Whatever you do, make it inspiring. Make it beautiful if you can. Work with artists, with designers, I don't know. And then tell the stories, film everything, so that after 2 or 3 years of a project, you can tell the story. Say, look where we were 3 years ago. Look where we are now. People look at what they said before. Look at what they say now. The testimonies and how it changed people's lives. And look at the place we started with. It's ugly, was ugly, and now look at it. It's beautiful, and that is inspiring. And because it's inspiring, it will inspire people to do the same or something, similar everywhere in the world, maybe. Take a look, if you don't know them, at the Transition Network, Transition Towns. There's not everything there, but there's a lot of useful tools to get started. It's something we need to do together. As I said, it's an ecosystem of actors. And in this ecosystem, you have thinkers, makers, inspirers, organizers, and facilitators. Thinkers are people who study things, conceptualize, and make recommendations. I'm a thinker. Makers are people who develop ideas and practices, lead by example, and share their knowledge and know-hows. I'm not really one of the makers, not yet. Inspirers are people who shape stories, make change inspiring, and spread the word. I'm trying to be an inspirer. Organizers are people who structure, animate, coordinate a project, a dynamic, a movement, a change. And facilitators have people who have means. It's not necessarily money, but they can fund, they can provide resources, that can be providing skills and knowledge, and that could be providing a place, providing equipment, providing access to a network, God knows what. And they empower others to do their projects. I told you where I am. I'm one of the thinkers and one of the aspirers, I hope. Now you need to tell you where you are. What agent of change are you? What agent of change can you be? But most importantly, maybe, what agent of change do you want to be? And then once you find the answer to that question, work with other types of change makers and build your projects knowing that you have to hit all 5 branches of the star for it to work well. It starts with conversations about the future. You ask yourself the questions, what are you afraid of? But what are your hopes as well? What are our vulnerabilities? But what also are our chances, our skills, the opportunities for us? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm finished. We are at a crossroads, and either we wake up or we will break down. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jutta. You can see we are all awake, more or less. I don't know whether it's more or less than it was in the morning. So I would like to invite some questions, and I believe there will be quite a few reactions to what Arthur said based on either the first part or the second part. Yeah, if you ask a question, can you just come up here so that Arthur can see you? Okay, yes, sure. Yeah. Collapse of
the growth because of the pandemic.
Right. So the question is about the pandemic and the war, and the impact of both is degrowth, or rather, is it the degrowth, the result of it?
There is some slowdown in economic growth, and maybe some, of course, some societies are in degrowth. Ukraine is in degrowth. The thing is that those crises are not the cause. They're not the source of any of our problems. They are revelators. They reveal some of our system's vulnerabilities, some of the ways our system functions or dysfunctions, malfunctions, and also it accelerates some of the processes, but it's not a cause. It's just an accelerator. The result of that is now, but maybe more in the forthcoming years, because we haven't seen all the aftermath yet. So the result is, I mean, there will have many implications. One of those will be an impact on economic growth. Yes, it will be. But economic growth has been slowing down worldwide since the 1970s. It's not something new. The rate of growth, economic growth, has going down for 50 years, and it will reach, I believe, it will reach zero and go underneath, become a recession. Now, one thing I want to say is that you should not mix up degrowth and recession. It's not the same thing. I understand that the word is hard to understand, and it's not a well-chosen word, I would say. I don't like it. degrowth is not the opposite of growth. It's not. The growth is what? I mean, economic growth. I mean, economic growth means the growth of one indicator, which is GDP. It's a measure of something. The opposite of that is recession, or even worse, depression. Now, degrowth is not the measure of anything. It's a new project for a new society. And you need to understand that. I'm not trying to convince you it's good. It's not my point. My point is to try to make the debate clear. When you hear people say, degrowth advocates, they're crazy. What they think is that degrowth advocates are saying that we need to make the economy smaller without changing anything else, just reducing GDP. And if we do that within the current system, it would be a social nightmare. It would be a catastrophe, because our social model is built upon the economic model, and this economic model would collapse if GDP goes down. No, but it's precisely not what degrowth advocates are saying. What they're saying is we need to organize an energy and material descent because we have to, and for this will necessarily imply a descent in GDP as well. So we need to change profoundly the economic system and the social system. It's a new project for a new society. That's what it is. People are do not agree on everything. There are many ideas, many propositions from degrowth thinkers, and really get into it. Try to see, because now we need to experiment those. We need to experiment those ideas that come from the degrowth movement. Some are good, some are bad. I don't know. I'm not even a degrowth, as I said, advocate myself. But what I'm saying is that if your solutions do not imply an energy and material descent, they're not part of the solution. They're still part of the problem. So that's what I wanted to make clear as well. Depression, recession, it's not the same as degrowth.
Further questions? Yes, please, if you want to come up here.
Sure. Hi, Arthur. I'll try to make it short, but I wanted to ask you, because in social sciences, we try to look at, let's say, structures of power and institutions, and you talk about creating series of ideas and new networks. And there's, I would like to ask you what you think about in the current system, where there is, powerful networks of entrenched oligarchic networks of elites. And if you look at Davos, for example, they want to know what, of course, the future of the world will look like, because they want to create the space for themselves to keep the top of the, let's say, the pyramid, if you want to think about society in this way. So there is, if you look at the history of revolutions, you have several factions that create based on their, what they want to achieve and what, well, let's say the referential position, relative position they have in terms of distribution of power. And here, it's also connected to the creation of culture as well. So it's how this can be spread out throughout society. And if you look at, for example, Davos, they had a very specific definition of resilience. They try also to push this idea of great reset, where they say that you will own nothing and you will be happy. But of course, this is, it's one thing to have they will of course be invested in the survival of the planet as such, but they will do it in a way that is they will try to conceive it in a way which is response, will still put them ensure the position, let's say. And it's not an agenda which is going to be, well, focused on more interesting conceptions of distribution of power in the society and to give more opportunities and voices and so on. If anything, they will make everybody drones. That's a bit of so I don't know if you have, you work with institutions, you work with governments, you work with the. I'd like to hear more about how, how to engage cross with other networks, or how to perceive them. Is it something which will, of course, create conflicts? Of course, will create disruptions, but is it a way to, engage, try to get into institutions, change from inside, and or see them as enemies? It's a bit of this, well, complicated question, of course.
Okay, it's a complicated question indeed. Thank you for asking, because it's a good one. And very often I do not oppose things. Do we need to work with them, or do we need to consider them enemies, both at the same time. They're allies, they're enemies as well. It depends who, when, how, where. So we need to have people working on this problem from different point of view. As you said, there are very strong force fields. I don't know. There are very strong architectures of power there, which are in place, and people who are at the top of these pyramids will want to maintain the pyramid, whatever it costs. Even if the world changes, they still see the change as an opportunity. And they still see change as an opportunity because they do not understand what's at stake. They still do not. After having talked with leaders, with decision makers, politicians, and some, not oligarchs, but some rich people, I can tell one thing. And it's not just my experience. It's also the many conversations which I've had with people who work and know these people much better than I do. And the conclusion is always the same. They do not understand. They have no idea of the stakes. For them, climate change is real. Not for all of them, but for some of them, climate change is real. It's a threat, but we can deal with that threat through technological advances and some political choices. And okay, we're going to have to make some efforts. We'll do them. And that's it. And then there are going to be crises. There are going to be crises, but crises here and there, not at the same place, not at the same time. So if they happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, well, they'll go somewhere else because they have the means to do that. And they'll always be somewhere where there's no problem. And for them, yeah, it's okay. They don't understand that we're playing with the very habitability of planet Earth. That they have not understood yet. And that there is no safe place even for them. In the short term, of course, the rich people and the influent people, they might be more, they may fare better than most people, but only in the short run. Within 10 or 20 or 30 years, it's going to be the same for them pretty much. And they don't see that. So what they perceive as opportunity is a wrong understanding of our predicament. Now, we need to put pressure on them, and put pressure. There's many ways to do it, but let's say to be quick, that we can show them what can be done. So the first thing we should do is build alternatives and make them inspiring. If they're inspiring, people will adopt them, and it will become a movement. And if it becomes a strong enough movement, politicians will follow. So that's how we show how we can do things differently. But then we also have to try to change the system as much as we can by getting into the system, by becoming politicians by ourselves or policymakers ourselves, or trying to. Or if not, by putting pressure on policymakers, either gently, nicely, inspiring them, showing them what can be done, and that the conventional solutions do not apply anymore, trying to make them understand, trying to do what I do, and then propose things, concrete options. But if that doesn't work either, if it's not enough, well, there's one thing left. It's called resistance, or maybe a revolution. Now, we always need to be careful, because when there's a revolution, we know what's before. We not always know exactly what comes after. So we need to be very careful. But still, the system is going to kill us. This system is just driving us to the cliff. So we need to stop it somewhere or another. So either it's with the help of decision makers, or it will have to be against them. Now there's a last option, which is to wait. Wait until the system collapses by itself, because it will. But the problem is, when will that happen, and how will that happen? If it happens progressively, we can deal with it. But if it takes too long, then we will have polluted so much. We will have rendered the earth so toxic. We will have destroyed so many of our ecological systems that it will be hard to rebound. So it needs to happen soon. It needs to happen soon, but not too fast, because if it happens too fast and we're not ready for that, we haven't developed a resilience yet in terms of food and energy and transportation mainly, and of course habitats and stuff. If we haven't done that yet, then it's going to be chaos, and in this chaos, people will become improvised hunters and fishers and I just say that, and people who chop trees. Can you call them?
Lumberjack?
Yeah. That's what they'll become, and it might be an ecological nightmare as well. So that's it. Either we wait till it falls, because it will, or we try to provoke it somehow to help it change and maybe stop at least the parts of the problem, the dimensions of the system which are too problematic. And we need resilience, because that will be our security nets for when the tipping points are passed.
Okay, thank you. Unless we have any burning questions, yeah, just very quickly, if you don't mind.
Hi, Arthur. Thank you very much for the presentation. That was great. When you talked about the problem versus the symptom, I'm wondering, isn't the problem like a bit deeper than like the 7-8 spheres that you presented? Is it like actually deeply rooted within ourselves? And therefore, isn't there a need for the solution to do some kind of like inner transformation that comes from a sort of spirituality? And I'm not talking about believing in God or whatever. I'm just talking about being able to look like to just like slow down, to meditate, to have like some sort of practice that enables us to not fall into escape through drinking, consuming, sex, whatever you want. Do you think we need some sort of inner transformation? And have you done something like that yourself? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see you have a Fresque du Climat logo on you.
Arthur, just very briefly, we need to finish within like 2 minutes, so if you can keep it brief. I know it's an existential question. It's a big request.
Question. So what I will say in 2 minutes is that I haven't done that transformation myself. It can be useful and very useful from the individual point of view. The problem is, how do you massify that? How do you can have a few people going through spiritual and psychological transformation, but if it's an individual process, then how do you make sure that most people do? And that's a challenge, which is, I would say, a wicked problem. That we can't make sure that everyone or most people do an individual parcours, an individual trajectory of the kind of what you're proposing. So I believe that's an intrinsic limit of what you're asking, of what you're saying, even if that's important. What I do, to finish, what I do not think is that there is something in us that prevents us from doing the right decision. For example, Sébastien Boller, a French author, says that in our brain there's something which compels us to do some things, and that it's not compatible with what we should do. And this is just a theory. I'm not competent to say where he's wrong, where he's right, but it's just a theory. I believe it's cultural, and cultures can change. Now, there are two ways of changing culture. Either we wait for it to change, and it will change in a chaotic manner, or we try to have an influence on how culture should change. So we need now to work on the cultural level and to collaborate with people who work on the cultural level, artists and influencers like and decision makers.